Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service. It is the 10th of December. As always, we encourage you to visit our website and listen to NOAA Weather Radio for your very latest weather information. arh.noaa.gov is a place to go for the entire statewide view. If you like to get your more localized view for Fairbanks, Juneau, or the Anchorage National Weather Service forecast areas, you can do that easily by going to weather.gov, clicking on Alaska, and that will take you immediately to your nearest service office there that serves your community and village. Give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find each Weather Service office in Anchorage on Twitter, on Facebook under one place, on Facebook at U.S. National Weather Service Alaska, and on YouTube. During the mid-afternoon, you'll get kind of a sneak peek of what we're thinking about using our surface charts that you'll see here in just a minute. That's under NWS Anchorage. And after this show, and about a few minutes later, after the whole file uploads, of course, you'll get the entire 30 minutes of Alaska weather. You can do that by going to YouTube and just type in AKWX TV or search for Alaska Weather in quotes, and you'll get this entire show there. Again, each day is in view. If you like to go back and see what happened the day before, if you want to wait for the entire show, it's a great way to do it just in case you haven't made it into port yet and you want to catch up on what you may have missed if you didn't catch the broadcast. Here we go. If you're looking at southeast tonight, you'll notice a large part of the panhandle is lit up with a little bit more active weather than what we've seen in recent weeks. The cold has certainly been upon you, but now the moisture is coming back in and the cold hasn't left. So with storm energy moving in, several cold fronts trying to work through the north and eastern parts of the Gulf, and one of those sliding right through southeast, it's high time you had a little bit of snow. And if you're up around the Haines, the highway area, the Haynesboro, the Klondike Highway and the Thai Inlet is where I'm trying to get to. There's a very good possibility you're going to see a pretty decent amount of snow along with some gusty winds. We're looking at some west winds probably approaching 15 to 25 miles per hour as we get into the daytime tomorrow. Wind chills that could drop to about 20 below along some parts of the highway. But the real coup de grace is the 17 to 30 inches of snow that'll be possible. There could be some higher amounts a little bit higher up along the pass there. So blizzard warnings possible are actually going into effect tonight and tomorrow for the Thai Inlet and Klondike Highway areas there. So if you're planning to do some travel in that region, probably a real good time to start thinking about some other ways to get where you need to go, or perhaps just putting off your trip for a little while. As again, a blizzard warning, nothing to mess around with, especially in Alaska. A winter storm warning also posted for areas just a little bit further south there for the Haynesboro. Again, that goes into effect as we head into 5 o'clock Wednesday morning, going through the afternoon, and many areas, including Juneau, parts north and south, also under a winter storm watch. Chances are you're going to see a pretty good handful of snow there, likely approaching that 10 to 20 inch mark. So that will include the Juneau area as we get into Wednesday. Now, the issue with southeast is that there's going to be a very sharp definition in who gets the rain and who gets the snow. That cold air boundary is going to be shifting a little bit across the midsections of southeast, and already we're starting to see some snow up around Hyder. A winter storm warning is in effect there. But there's going to be some very sharp delineations between who gets a lot of snow and who gets a lot of rain. So watch for some of these things to change. Watch for a storm watch to become a warning if that cold air and that moisture meet up. And again, that could include places close to Juneau. Chances are you're going to get some snow. The question is how much, and does that meet that winter storm warning criteria there? If you're looking farther north, you also see areas in the interior are lit up there. That is a winter weather advisory. Some places also looking at wind chill advisories, I believe, or wind advisories. We're talking about mainly a wind and blowing snow issue for most of this area. It is not an additional snowfall issue like what we're seeing in southeast. And for places like Eagle and Tok and maybe Northway, you might pick up another inch or two of accumulation, but by and large it's the moving air that's going to cause the problem. Wind chill values will probably drop to about 40 to about 45 below, so it will feel like 40 to 45 below, even though the temperature may look a little bit different. You're used to that happening, and this is a time that it does look to be fairly likely out there. So wind chill advisories and winter weather advisories posted for areas around the Fairbanks area and points northward all the way through the south-facing slopes of the eastern Brooks Range, including the Yukon Flats. Looking out to the west now, several waves of moisture have set up. We've got our current storm system here across the Alaska Peninsula that we'll talk about in a minute. Another wave crossing through the western Bering and a little bit farther south across the North Pacific, and yet another wave west of the Kamchatka Peninsula. So each one of these represents a new opportunity in the coming weeks to change up our weather a little bit across Alaska. But right now, our major player is the colder air that's dropping south out of the Arctic. We've had several rounds of very warm or mild air across south central, across the interior, and of course across the North Slope. As you well know, temperatures have been well off what we would consider to be the average mark there. And across southeast now, we've had cold air, and here comes the moisture moving in on one of those waves that we saw ahead of the pack there. This would be number one of the three that we just lined up across the western satellite view. Across the west, northerly flow coming down will continue the quick spread of ice across places like the Bering Strait and the Arctic coast. This will also keep gusty winds moving across the north and northern Gulf and the northwestern sections of the Gulf there. It will likely keep a strong draw from east to west across the interior, thus increasing the threat for some dangerous wind chills and certainly increasing the threat for blowing and drifting snow. And that's certainly what we're going to see across the Klondike Highway and Taya Inlet areas as we get into tomorrow, especially by midday tomorrow and tomorrow afternoon. So a lot going on all the way around Alaska, especially across southeast there with the near term changes coming your way. Low pressure across the Gulf at 986 millibars working its way north and east, and you can see the cold and moisture interacting quickly beginning as early as tonight. Places like Hyder again already seeing some snowfall there. Low pressure is really going to just sit and spin here across the Gulf over the next 24 hours. You have a very tight pressure gradient across the interior, and for southwest that will gradually clear out some of the clouds for Bristol Bay. Notice a lot of cloud cover across the Bering as always. 1009 millibar low slowly creeping across just north of the Aleutians and affecting the western and central parts of the chain. High pressure across the north about 1043 millibars. Pretty cold stuff, and it really sets up kind of a block across the northern parts of Alaska there, creating that strong draw off the Canadian part of the continent. And as we well know, that's where a bulk of the cold air really likes to come in from. So cold and dry for a large part of the interior. If we have any solar events, the interior, of course, will be the place to go as it usually is, but should have a great opportunity for aurora viewing, assuming that the blowing snow isn't obscuring your view too much. As we go through Thursday, areas along the northern Gulf Coast and probably into the Copper River Basin, the Yukon, and certainly northern parts of southeast have a very good opportunity at periods of heavy snow there. And again, that could include places like Juneau. Afternoon temperatures in the 30s and 40s this afternoon. Readings cooling down there across the northern parts, though, while it was Heidelberg at 45 and areas around look like Sand Point, some of the warmest temperatures across the state. As you go just a little bit further north into south central, especially once you get back onto the main parts of the continent, temperatures cooled off quickly into the 20s and 30s around Prince William Sound. 0 in Fort Yukon, 7 in Fairbanks. As you get up toward Anaktuvuk Pass, it was 11 below. Atkasuk was 19 below. Look like 3 below around Barrow, 17 below around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, not too far off. 10 degrees around Point Lay and Point Hope. Kivalina only 13. Shishmaref back on the chart at 10, and Nome was showing 22 around Unalakleet, 19 degrees there. Bethel 22. King Salmon and Dillingham in the low to mid 30s with Kodiak at 41. The Alaskan Peninsula again mostly in the lower 40s with 41 around Dutch Harbor and Alaska. The Pribilofs in the 30s, and the western and central Aleutians just barely trying to get up to that 40-degree mark there. Couldn't do it. As you look at overnight low temperatures tonight, most areas in the northern parts of the Panhandle will be at or just above freezing. Southeast and the farther sections there, certainly warmer, upper 30s to about 40 degrees around Sitka. 35 in Kodiak, teens for most of south central, including the Mat-Su Valley, 8 below in Fairbanks, and as you get north of the Tanana Valley in the Yukon, temperatures take a tumble into the anywhere from 10 to about 25 below, with one exception. You see the sore thumb sticking out there? Yeah, try Arctic Village at 44 below. Goodness sakes, that's cold. Anywhere from 10 to about 25 below across the North Slope and the Arctic coast. 1 below in Nome, the YK Delta mainly above 0. King Salmon and Dillingham both in the teens, 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and 36 out in Shemya with high temperatures tomorrow there nearing 40. The West Coast in the teens and 20s, Nome at 15, Barrow about 3 below tomorrow. Fairbanks, you'll see 5 below. Looks like Fort Yukon at 11 below. Arctic Village, 25 below. That's better than the 40 below reading we just saw. 20s and 30s for south central, about 23 or so in Anchorage, and 30s and 40s for southeast, with the coldest temperatures there across the northern half Yucatan, about 33. Flying weather, well, most of the interior, as you would expect with that very cold and dry air, should be VFR. That means most of our passes will see that. With the exception of the Chilkoot and White Pass there, that's probably what you'll see for most of Alaska, the western parts of the Bering, certainly just north of the west central Aleutians, likely looking at some IFR conditions there, as well as northern parts of the Gulf and some areas across the higher train of southeast. Let's check your passes, though. As we said, Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass both expected to be visual flight rule. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should be just fine. Rainy Pass, we expect to see great influences by high and dry weather patterns there. Isabel, VFR conditions there. Mentasta Pass will take a little time to improve all the way to VFR, but we do expect that to happen for your Wednesday. Tanita Pass, probably VFR conditions. Portage Pass, we expect it to be VFR. And Chilkoot and White Pass, no. This should be MVFR, heading for IFR conditions with blizzard conditions expected there. You can just scratch this one off your list. Probably a no-go for most pilots there tomorrow. So, yeah, I wouldn't risk that one. Freezing levels there. As you would expect, you can see that cold air is starting to make its way southward once again, but levels aloft are starting to work their way northward. So we've got this warm and wet air working its way into the eastern parts of the Gulf. Meanwhile, the other side of the pattern is dragging that cold, dry air down at the surface, and we don't see that intrusion of the warm, wet air making its way up the west coast like we did last week. So big changes there in the pattern. Icing potential, absolutely. Below 10,000 feet and mainly above 4,000 feet, you'll run into at least light to isolated moderate and perhaps some occasional moderate icing potential there, mainly across the eastern Gulf and northern sections of southeast tomorrow. The upper level weather pattern shows that trough digging southward. Look at that northerly flow coming straight at western Alaska. No wonder it's getting colder and drier aloft. As this trough moves eastward, it's going to encourage that snowstorm across parts of southeast and certainly across the Yukon. Out to the west, any signs of warming? Not really. We've got a trough that's digging in a little bit across areas west of the Kamchatka Peninsula, but that is a long way away compared to where we are right now. A north and easterly flow coming across the north and western parts of Alaska. We've got a trough of low pressure here, encouraging that cold, dry air to drop southward into the Bristol Bay region and across the Aleutians and the Alaskan Peninsula. Here's that warm and wet air still working across southeast, but again with that cold air at the surface, good setup for snow across southeast. Here's 3,000 feet. We've got that easterly flow cutting across the interior, and that's going to be a little bit stronger there. If you're trying to fly around, even in VFR conditions, that's going to give you some chop there across the interior. So watch that area, especially north of the Alaska Range and south of the Brooks Range. A lot of wind moving through the heart of Alaska. Low pressure across the Gulf again, encouraging that stronger wind flow coming into southeast. Expect some higher wind gusts across the Panhandle in the next 24 to 36 hours. Turbulence below 6,000 feet. Yeah, there's going to be some chop, not to mention poor visibility across the northern parts of southeast there, especially with the snow flying. And again, some widespread areas of turbulence probably across the interior, north of the Alaska Range, out to the YK Delta, and south of the Brooks Range as we go through your Wednesday and probably into Thursday as well. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Jim Peranto. Nestled in the town of Palmer is the highly sophisticated West Coast and Alaska Tsunami Warning Center, which is responsible for providing reliable tsunami detection, forecasts and warnings, and to promote community resiliency. The center is responsible for monitoring all of the North American coast, including Canada, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, with the exception of Mexico. Today I'll be speaking with Cindy Preller, a geologist at the center, and she'll give us some insight on the products they issue and what they mean. Welcome to the studio, Cindy.
Thank you, James.
So what types of data does the center record to determine the tsunami threat?
We receive over 300 seismic gauges and tidal gauges that are scattered all over the globe real time. And we also maintain our own Alaska network of both seismic and tide. Okay.
What type of products do you issue at the center?
We issue 4 products. We issue a warning. We also issue an advisory and a watch, and then a tsunami information statement.
Okay, so you have 4 different pieces there.
Yes.
What do the messages mean? So you have the warning, you have the watch. What do those mean?
Well, the warning is when we know a tsunami's been generated and we're expecting over a meter of water to touch our coastline in our area of responsibility. So we'll issue a warning for that area, which means to evacuate. And then the advisory, which is actually our second level product, means that there is a tsunami, but we're not expecting people to evacuate.
Okay, and that's changed, right? That
It
definition,
has.
just recently.
Yes.
So again, explain the tsunami advisory in detail. What that means.
Sure. So one of the things we do with our ocean modeling, which is based on bathymetry and the speed of the wave, is we forecast a wave height on every these benchmarks along the coastline, and if we're expecting over a meter at any one of those, we will issue a warning.
Okay.
Which is to evacuate. And if we are expecting anything between 30 centimeters and a meter, then we'll issue an advisory. Because we've found that most damaging tsunamis, really damaging tsunamis, are over a meter in height, but there can be extensive harbor damage and beachfront damage for even 30 centimeters of water.
Okay, and then back to the watch. So what does that mean?
A watch just means that there is a tsunami in the basin.
Okay.
So for example, if there was an earthquake in Fiji that generated a tsunami, we aren't expecting it to touch our AOR, but there is a tsunami in the Pacific. So we might issue a watch, and it just means heads up. You know, there's something going on. If it's big enough, it still may affect us. So it just means we're monitoring.
Okay, and it could change into a warning.
Sure, or an advisory.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you also mention an information statement. So what is that?
Yeah, and we issue more information statements than anything else, and it's kind of our PTSD message. It's meant for people that have survived tsunamis. And if they're on the coast and they feel an earthquake, because we teach if you are on the coast and you feel an earthquake, it may generate a tsunami before we can warn. So if you're on the coast and you feel an earthquake, but it's too small to generate a tsunami, we'll issue an information statement saying, relax, this is too small, no worries.
Okay. What are the appropriate actions people should be taking when they see these messages come out, whether it's a warning, an advisory, information statement?
People should always do what their local emergency managers instruct them to do first and foremost. So regardless of what we recommend, if their local fire chief is saying evacuate, then they should evacuate. We recommend evacuation for the warning, anything above a meter. And for the advisory, it's really, I think, supposed to be very helpful for emergency managers because it just means clear the beach and clear the harbor. But you don't have to clear your town, you don't have to worry about moving, you know, hospitals and that kind of stuff. It's just get off the beach.
I remember when I worked in Kodiak, and we have a balloon launch site that's near the coast. I remember seeing information there. It's like if you feel the earthquake, and if it's enough to knock you down, don't worry for the warning statement to come out, or you know, just get to higher ground.
Get to higher ground. You know, even something like a landslide can generate a tsunami, and there's no way we can warn you for that. So, you know, you just need to be smart. But the other thing about a tsunami that's different than a weather wave or a wind wave is that it's, you know, it has the full energy of the earthquake behind it. So the entire water column is moving. That's 5 miles deep of water in some places, right? That's pretty tremendous.
Yeah.
So it can create some just wild currents and some very squirrely behavior near the coastline. And the other thing is if there is a warning, it may last for days and days and days. So when people evacuate, they should expect to be evacuated for a long time.
And that goes along with the Asian tsunami, and everybody got to see firsthand, you know, just how powerful these things can be.
Yeah, terrifying.
And you mentioned before off air, you know, that particular tsunami was recorded all over the world.
Every tide gauge on the planet recorded it, and the tsunami itself lasted for longer than 30 hours. Because a tsunami isn't a single wave, it's a chain of waves that can continue for days.
How often are tsunami warnings issued?
You know, not that often. We've had, there's probably a handful every decade. There have been 13 since 1980 that have been issued. And of those 13, 8 of them were tsunamis.
Okay.
But you know, in 2007, I think it was 2007, there were 17 tsunamis recorded. So in 1 year there were 17 tsunamis, but most of them are small and they're well behaved and they give us data and they don't hurt anybody. So a tsunami does not necessarily mean it'll be another Sumatra or another 64 like we had here.
Right.
I mean, it can actually be pretty small.
And your area of responsibility is quite big. I mean, here you are in the small town of Palmer.
Yeah.
And you are really looking at a wide range of coastline, including the Caribbean.
Yes.
So
yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's like we have our thumb on the pulse of the planet, and basically it's the whole planet because we are also Hawaii's backup, and they're responsible for the international ocean. But our primary responsibility is to the U.S., North American, and Canadian coastlines, as well as Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, including the British Virgin Islands. So it's crazy because there's different cultures all over the country. There are different hazards all over the country, and trying to spread tsunami awareness is a huge task for our little staff in Palmer.
Yeah. And you have a website.
We do.
You want to touch a little bit about the information that you have on the webpage that might be beneficial for people out there?
Sure. And the thing that people should remember is tsunami.gov. Because the website's address is long and you won't remember it. So tsunami.gov is great. And that'll take you to both our website and Hawaii's, as well as some other outreach, international outreach sites. But once you get to our website, it'll tell you, first off, if there's a warning. It'll have maps that show you where, and there's phone numbers and links to emergency managers. But also, if there's been a tsunami, we'll have all the data up, as well as the tide gauge records that'll graphically show the tsunami. And so a couple days ago, there was an earthquake in the Caribbean, right, 7.2. And we're still analyzing that to see if there's a tsunami, but the data will be up on the web as soon as we know.
And there's something else on the web, I remember. It's something, if you feel the earthquake, people can actually go to the website and say, gosh, I felt that, and give sort of a detailed description of that, and that goes to you guys at the center?
It goes to us, but ultimately it goes to the USGS and the National Earthquake Information Center in Golden. They generate what's called shake maps out of those reports, and so they are very useful, and they're fun to read. They are. They are.
Well, thank you for coming in today, Cindy.
James,
I really appreciate it. It's been wonderful talking to you. We'll get you back in the studio again sometime
Anytime.
soon. And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
Thanks a lot, guys. Now is always a great time to think about being better prepared and start moving down that pathway. GreatShakeout.org is a good place to go, especially in light of the big anniversary coming up on the Great Alaska Quake. Here's the marine forecast for Southeast. You notice stronger winds coming out of the north through the Lynn Canal, 35 knots with an 8-foot sea. Also looking at some higher seas there across some of the southern inner channels, including the Dixon entrance, especially where we're more likely to see 13-foot seas there with 35-knot wind. Stronger winds along the coastline and higher gusts that could reach up to 50 knots, especially across the northern half of the coastal areas on Wednesday. Watch what happens as we get into Thursday. Winds diminish ever so slightly. We're still looking at a decent amount of wind moving over the area on top of winter weather. Remember, blizzard warnings for the Tai Inlet and Klondike Highway areas, and winter storm warnings for some parts of Southeast, and winter storm watches, including areas of Juneau as we head into Wednesday. So be very aware of the weather and the changes coming for Southeast as we go through Wednesday and Thursday. For South Central, higher gusts expected inside and outside Prince William Sound. 20 to 25 knot winds coming in from the north and east. Seas running around 10 to 12 feet or so as you go down the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula. Northerly winds also picking up a little bit across the Cook Inlet. Freezing spray is a possibility there. Northerlies across Shelikof Strait with a 9-foot sea. Also looking at 15-foot seas on the south and east side of Kodiak Island. The wind shift starts to take place as we get into Thursday. A 15 to 25 knot flow coming in from the west, cutting across Kodiak Island and east of the Barren Islands there. North and easterly flow also cutting into the low pressure system that's sitting right here across the central Gulf. The Cook Inlet still looking breezy, 20 to 25 knots with a 5-foot sea, and freezing spray is still a threat. Across the Alaska Peninsula, northeasterlies coming out of Bristol Bay with a 4-foot sea. Otherwise, northwesterlies coming across the Pacific side at 20 knots with a 10 to 13-foot sea. Freezing spray on both sides of the Alaska Peninsula as we go through Wednesday, and that threat remains as we head into Thursday with the north and easterly flow continuing for Bristol Bay with a 9-foot sea. Northerlies cutting into the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula at 25 knots, and northwesterly winds starting to pick up a little bit there, 25 to 30 knots with an 8 to 9 foot sea. The sea should be diminishing ever so slightly on Thursday. North and westerly flow across central and eastern parts of the Aleutians there as we go through the midweek. 7 to 9 foot seas on the north side, 8 to 9 foot seas on the Pacific side, with westerlies down to about 15 knots or south of Nikolsky. For the western Aleutians, 25 to about 30 knots or so, cutting across Kiska and Attu. 10-foot seas are expected there. The winds shift to a north and easterly direction as we get into Thursday. 25 to 30 knots for most areas there as we go into Thursday afternoon. 6 to 7 foot seas on the south side and 9 to 10 foot seas on the north side as we get into Thursday afternoon. North and easterly winds coming off the continent are going to be pretty cold, and that means freezing spray again is a threat from the northern sections of the Bering all the way down to the Pribilofs. Look for winds to run around 20 to 35 knots, 7 to 10 foot seas in the north and 7 to 9 foot seas in the south. Out of Kuskokwim Bay, that's a 9 foot sea with a 35 knot wind out of the north. Across St. Lawrence Island, northeasterlies with 6 foot seas and 7 foot seas around the Pribilofs. Inside there, you're looking at a northerly wind at 30 knots. And across the western parts of the North Slope there, especially around the Chukchi Seacoast, an easterly offshore wind coming at 25 to 35 knots. Look for freezing spray to remain a threat through Wednesday and Thursday. Onshore flow at 10 to 15 knots for the Beaufort Seacoast reverses and starts to blow parallel to the coast, which means blowing and drifting snow may be an issue there, even though winds should be relatively light along the coast. For example, Barrow at southeasterly flow only at 5 knots there. The wind's still a little brisk there at times from Cape Lisburne southward towards Shishmaref, 15 to about 20 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, winter weather is moving into southeast. Wet weather combined with cold air that's been sitting in place for several days will create a winter weather threat for the Klondike Highway and the passes there. It looks like you'll be dealing with anywhere from 10 to 20, maybe 30 inches of snow in some cases, certainly more at higher altitudes. Juneau, you're under a winter storm watch as we head through tomorrow. Watch for changing weather there as that very sharp boundary starts to sag southward into southern parts of southeast. More snow on the day through Wednesday and more to come as you head into Thursday. Stay tuned to weather.gov. Thanks for watching.
The National Weather Service.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.